And this is the public comments and questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to give each person 3 minutes to provide their comments and or questions. And the panel may be able to respond, or it may be deferred to the report. But this is your opportunity to have input to the panel. And if you go long, once again, I'll be cruel and have to shut you down or cut it short, just so that we give an equal chance to everyone. The first card I had, and it actually didn't have a name associated with it. And again, we're focused on the science, so I'm going to ask you this in the context of science questions and experiments. Their question was, are there any clear, they crossed out clear, management actions that can be taken now to reduce predation on salmonids? If no, when should managers ask? And so in the context of this, we're only focused on the science, not the management. But if there are related science experiments that you have in mind or perceived from this, you could share that.
I'm not sure I got all of that, but so one of the things we did talk a lot about, and we'll probably end up in our report, is a lot of these panel charge questions were very broad, that sort of asked, is predation happening? Is it important? And sort of depending on what specific question you really wanted to know, that would lead to a very different pathway of scientific study. It would lead to a very different pathway of potentially management decisions, even though we are not here to talk about management decisions. So for instance, if you wanted to know whether historically the production of salmon has been dictated by predator populations, that would lead to a certain set of outcomes. If you wanted to know whether or not one could mitigate for the effects of losses in habitat and changes in flow via changes in predators, that would lead to a different change. So one of the things we may end up recommending, I'm not going to say definitely, is to make sure that coming from the regulatory people, there's a very clear articulation of a very specific question, because it leads to very different types of science.
Okay, thank you. Our second person is Jack Sales. Jack, are you here? And we have a microphone for you there. And try to keep your questions or comments to 1.5 minutes to 3, or something like that.
Oh, I wouldn't go over.
Okay.
Well, I came here to learn what I could, and I learned a lot yesterday, and I really appreciate it, and thank you all. However, I learned a lot more from people that I talked to on the side about fish at night. I admit to a bias for the night. It is what I know and what I want to know more about. Regardless, and with all due respect to all, until you embrace the night, you will only have half the picture. And I realize that all of you know that night is half the picture. I was disappointed at the assertion that there's no predation taking place in the Sacramento River water intake. What the data shows me is concentration of predators in the area and no indication of the time observed. It is well known that salmon outmigrate at night with preference to dark of the moon, and when they encounter light, they move to the shore for cover where the predators were shown. After looking at the Sacramento waterfront, it is hard to believe, no, it is inconceivable that this is not a gauntlet of death for juvenile salmon. Simply Google the following and look at the night photos. Sacramento River waterfront, Sacramento water intake. It looks like the 4th of July. The intake structure, Old Sacramento. Until a rigorous 24-hour acoustic tracking study is done from above the American River to below the Freeport water intake, you will not have the full story. Until night levels and light levels and spectrums are studying the Sacramento River and Delta, you will not have the full story. Many times I get pushback about light at night, and you can't do anything. Well, there's a lot that can be done. The times have changed. Lighting is what I know. The IDA has changed the face of the lighting industry. Today, LED light-emitting diode technologies are changing lighting technology at a breakneck speed. We can't keep up. Should you agree that night is important to this issue, new technology can help. We are in the city of Davis with an outdoor lighting ordinance, at a university with the most advanced outdoor lighting technology, and 2 to 3 miles from here is a CLTC, California Lighting Technology Center, and it's a resource for you. And they are associated with the college. cltc.ucdavis.edu. For instance, Kim Lighting has turtle-friendly lighting, which could easily be termed salmon-friendly lighting.
Okay,
Here's a picture. 1 second.
We just need to wrap up there.
Inside is a page they talk about more coast, wildlife, and turtle-friendly lighting. That's because this light is available in a 1700-degree Kelvin amber light.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you, Jack. Okay, I don't know if the panel has any comments on that. Thank you, Jack. Our next speaker is John Butler. He's off in the back on the right. The Allied Fishing Group. I got it right today, John.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that. For those who aren't aware of it, the Allied Fishing Groups represent 40 of the state's leading fishery organizations that have been working, some of us for at least 30 to 40 years, on trying to restore the estuary, and that's why we support science. It has to be the foundation for bringing everything back that we used to have in such great abundance. So yesterday I talked about the tremendous financial limits on achieving that goal. Today I wanted to ask you that if you were to decide that a good deal of more study needs to take place on predation, I would like to urge you on behalf of the Allied Fishing Groups to evaluate the role played in the predation by the design and operation of the state and federal water projects, and specifically to review both their direct and their indirect impacts on the hydrology of the Bay-Delta ecosystem. And what you'll find is fish, especially salmonids, are pulled out of their migration corridors during various times of the year, pulled into the interior delta channels, and some of them actually survived to be screened at the screens inside Clifton Court Forebay. It's a very important element that I wish you to consider. And secondly, in that process, there have been estimates made on salvage losses for I think about 30 years. No one has bothered to analyze the cumulative impact of those losses over that time frame. And I have to say that it may be a completely hidden factor in determining the health of all the fisheries that are entrained and the food web. And I think finally, a lot of people here want to say thank you to you for taking your time to look into these very important issues.
All right. Thank you, John. Okay, next we have David Ostrack of Ostrack Consulting. He's right in front of you there.
Yeah, first I want to
Well, let's get you on the microphone so we can all hear. Thanks.
mics too. I want to thank Gary and the rest of the committee, especially for the presentation this morning. I understand what it takes to go through this in 14 hours, and I appreciate and believe you're going to see the forest through the trees. I had 3 comments on the science presentations from yesterday, but apparently I'm not going to be given the time to relate that to you. So one of the things that I'd like answered after I'll try to race through the 3 topics is how we present all the information that was presented by myself and others to get to you, and how we address some of these concerns that scientists that have worked in the area for 25 or 30 years, that in my opinion, you should have been provided access to us and some kind of background from us to get a perspective. But given that, really briefly, because I had three comments. One was that in Gary's presentation, you're right. There is no great abundance estimates for striped bass. You cannot believe the Peterson recapture. My work, the otolith microgeochemistry work, shows Peterson recapture is based on equal catchability of fish. We have subgroups, subpopulations. It's a good long-term trend. There is no disconnect between age 0 and adult striped bass, and the CPU should be ignored. The CPU is from recreational fishermen and sport fishermen catching them in the bays and the ocean. This population of striped bass spends the vast majority of its time inside the Gold Gate. It's not reflective of the population dynamics or the history. They didn't tell you that the striped bass that are found now, we rarely find any that are over 12 years old. Typically, we used to find them 20, 25 years old. A 6-year-old fish now is almost 40 to 60% smaller and less fit. The young of the year that they were talking about, the end of the young of the year, all of my work shows that those that survive the maternal transfer of contaminants, between 50 and 90% at every station they're collected, biomarkers, EROD, vitellogenin, metallothionein, are lighting up. We have high incidence of parasitism and disease. As Cynthia Ledoux-Bloom showed yesterday, she had to go through a whole bunch of fish just to get ones that were healthy enough to tag. We don't have healthy populations here. All these populations have crashed. Secondly, real briefly, the Clifton Court forebay, as Gary mentioned yesterday, it's a death trap. Anything that gets in there or near there or anything that gets inside is killed. So remove every predator from inside and outside the gates. It will make a minimal difference on salvage. What's salvage? A couple % of the tens of millions of fish that are killed annually by the pumps and trained, not to mention the indirect losses that John just mentioned. And then lastly, really briefly, the bioenergetics on striped bass. That project was started as a result of my research program because we were beginning to collect the data appropriate for it. When that was stopped, again, to try and use East Coast bioenergetics for a population that lives in the ocean, feeds on menhaden, different temperature, different growth rates, and then to use hatchery fish survival from a hatchery program I was involved in, and when it went down, I spent the next 25 years with the only reproducing striped bass in the state. You're talking about orders, many orders of magnitudes, grossly overestimating the consumption of striped bass year 1 to year 3. It's absolutely ludicrous
Okay,
to
let's
do.
let's try to wrap it up. There, David.
So again, I want to thank the panel, and the question that I'd like addressed for the panel is how do we get this information that was submitted in this process to you that wasn't, and is there a way for scientists, local scientists like myself, to provide you our editorial comments to try and help direct you to the best conclusion? And I would point to others like Peter Moyle and Bill Bennett, who you should confer with if you haven't. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I'll just answer that question that it's clarified for everybody. The panel is supposed to be independent, so we cannot have material given directly to us. So if you want to get material to us, you have to give it to the conveners, and they will either give it to us. Oh, sorry. So thank you so much. Did everybody hear me or not? You cannot give the panel information directly. If you want something to get to the panel, I assume you either send it via the website or you give it directly to the organizers. And it is up to them whether we see it or not. So I just want to clarify that for everybody because my email and everybody else's email is public, and sending stuff to us directly, it will not get it to us. We have already been told not to accept that information.
And
Yeah, I mean, you're the third person that's told me this, but the panel can't really get involved with that. Our job is just to evaluate the information that we're provided, so.
okay, thank you. Our next person is B.J. Miller. B.J.?
Thanks. My theory is that during pregnancy, Greg's mom was attacked by an egg timer. I have two quick things. One is there have been several mathematical models, life cycle models for fish other than salmonids that have used estimates of predator abundance based on the beach seine survey. And those data show that just the simple catch per toe show increases in the centrarchids of 5 to 7-fold in this century. So I suppose it would be all right to send this to the conveners, right? These data to the conveners for whatever use you'd like to make of them. For my point, it's hard to stack that data, those data up against the data on smolt survival through the Delta and conclude that the effect of predation on population levels is uncertain, but that's your decision to make.
I don't know if the bibliography was provided on the website, but we have read papers which deal with the increase in non-native species. So anyway, you know, once again, if anybody has information that you would like to have the panel evaluate, it needs to go to the conveners and they'll make the decisions.
Right, I got that message. The other point I wanted to make is one of the factors that has changed dramatically in this estuary that was not talked about yesterday is changes in nutrient concentrations, the ratios of nutrients. The changes have been fairly dramatic, and there are data that document these. There are a number of published papers on this general subject that also talk about the likelihood that these effects at the base of the food web, kind of consistent with the Nixon graph, have propagated up and affect species composition at all levels of the food web, including at the top. So this is a subject of some controversy in this region, but I think it would be useful for you all to at least have a look at this, because it is kind of another paradigm, you might say, a competing paradigm to the one that prevails. And I think it at least deserves some serious consideration, because the nice thing about it is it provides kind of a unifying theory as to why many of these changes have occurred. So I'll provide those published papers to the convener. I would never send them to you guys.
Apparently you're the only one.
Thanks,
But
PJ.
just to address your comments, you know, the panel certainly is aware of the multitude of changes that have occurred in the Delta, any one of which seems capable of producing diminished salmonid survivorship. And you know, you are probably a scientist yourself, and so you know one way of doing experiments is you hold everything constant and you perturb one thing. And when you look at the Delta and you go, oh, well, we've got this result, maybe this was constant, you can go right down the line and nothing is constant. Everything's changing, and all of these are important components, and that makes it so difficult to tease apart what the actual mechanism of change is and the specific causal factors.
Oh. Go for it, BJ. I'll give you a minute on the egg timer.
Yeah, it's a point you reminded me of, actually. But if you look at the factors that possibly could have led to this increased abundance of predators that may be associated with the decreased survival of salmonids in the Delta, I would list, and others have listed, temperature, turbidity, and then I would add these nutrients, ammonium, and the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus. Okay, if you look at the long-term, and those last two are primarily driven by the discharge from the Sacramento Regional Treatment Plant, which just adds 90% of the nitrogen to the Delta. They're going to upgrade their treatment, they're on a schedule to do that. It's probably a decade or more, because these things are difficult to do. All right, so if you look at the trends in all four of those, temperature, turbidity, ammonium, which is already above harmful levels, and N to P ratios, what you see is they're all increasing, and they're all going to continue to increase. They'll likely continue to increase between now and the time that the Sacramento regional treatment plants go online. So to whatever extent you can blame the predation that may be associated with the decreased survival on any one of these four factors, the signs are we've got a decade or more where these are going to get worse. Conditions are going to get worse. This is not like we got up here and it's going to stay like that. It's going to, all signs are this problem is going to be worse. And it seems to me there's some imperative to do something about that, and not just say wait for the Sacramento regional treatment plan improvements and hope for the best.
I guess I'd like to respond to that in two ways.
I'm not going to respond to this.
Okay, okay. The panel recognized that, and my few minutes of talking about proximate and ultimate causes really was getting at that specific question, that we know fish are stressed, and whether they're eaten by predators, and that might be the proximate cause of mortality. If they weren't stressed, then the predators couldn't get them. So the panel's well aware of the multitude of stressors that these fish face as they try and get from their natal streams down out to the ocean. The second thing I'd like to say, because this is the second time I've heard about the dominant paradigm, is that there's no dominant paradigm in the panel. I mean, we're all from different places. We all have open minds. We're very careful to be objective. So although out in the audience there may be thoughts that there's a dominant paradigm, that point of view does not exist within the panel.
Okay. Thank you. One point of clarification, and that is, since David and BJ brought it up on additional material, the material submittals, up until we convened the panel, we did outreach, and then it goes through the Delta Science Program standard process, and that's what was put forward. But what we will do is anything that's posted up over the next 2 weeks, we will again have that go through the science panel and make sure that's available. Everything that is submitted will be put on the website. And then we'll make sure it's directly transmitted what goes through that standard process that they have. The next person we have is Tom Cannon, representing the California Sport Fish Protection Alliance. Tom?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had three
Oh,
comments.
Got to go up a little bit louder.
Okay, I had three comments. The first one is related to the hatchery salmon. There are 20 million hatchery smolts dumped every spring in the upper river. 20 million. Now, you as good predator biologists know what that causes. It causes a tremendous stress on the whole system. It causes predator populations to expand and contract, and it leaves lots of predators there to eat all the wild fish. It's just a huge problem. All 20 million should be barged, like on the Columbia, to the Golden Gate, and that would completely eliminate the predation on the hatchery salmon and reduce the stressor on the wild salmon, and reduce competition, predation, save a lot of fish, that sort of thing. Second comment, the wild salmon are mostly subjected to the pumps and the screens in the Delta. Those screens are 60 years old. They need to be fixed. And those fish, and sometimes it's up to 1 million salmon a year, should be barged to the bay as well. And we'll get a lot higher survival for the wild salmon that reach the Delta. My third comment is, all of our wild salmon are born in small tailwaters. There's dams in almost every river. The spawning areas are very concentrated, the rearing areas are very concentrated, and most of the salmon are ocean type, which means they have to go to the bay and delta as fry. We need to create the conditions for their spawning and rearing and for their transport to the bay delta you know, away from the screens and away from the trapping in the delta. We need spring pulses. We need winter pulses. That would greatly reduce the predation on the wild salmon. Those are my 3 comments.
Thank you, Tom. And the final card we have is from Richard Garcia, representing the Sierra Club. Richard?
I'm from the San Joaquin Valley, Central Valley, which we're very interested in reestablishing a salmon run in our southern San Joaquin River. Is it on?
There you go.
Okay.
Just make sure you hold it up tight.
We would love to see a salmon run reestablished in the southern San Joaquin River. And my question is, has any studies or projections been done on what the effect would be if the California Department of Fish and Game removed the take limit and the size limit for the sportsman fishermen on striped bass? Right now, the fish is managed as a game fish. It's a great game fish, but if we allowed the sportsman anglers to just keep what they caught, has any models been projected on how that would affect this predator and how it might help our salmon runs?
I think I can answer that one. The commission decided not to change the regulations fairly recently after staff reports and input from a variety of scientists and stakeholders. And so they made that decision since they hold those regulations. They've made that choice.
From a scientific point of view,
Oh,
is
if you
that
have
a good
scientific
decision,
questions.
I guess is my question.
Okay.
I mean, shouldn't we just be allowed to yank out as many of these predators? They're non-native, and we're not going to eradicate them, but it might lower the pressure on our salmon run. That's just a non-scientist point of view. I just was wondering what you
Well,
guys...
that's something that the panel will address in its final report, but we're not really prepared to address that question right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you do.
Okay, with that, and thank you very much, Richard. That concludes our public section for this, and I want to, before we adjourn, once again, thank our panel and our presenters and all those who have participated in this. As you can see, it's certainly a topic that needs discussion, and there's not necessarily consensus on it, and we'll really be looking forward to your objective third-party perspective on this. Do look for the report. We're figuring early to mid-September. And also note the ability to post information over the next couple weeks for consideration by the science program towards additional material for the panel. It will go through that standard process, but please be aware of that. Thank you, everyone.